believed him. Like people believe
Hmm.
him. They're like, oh, they're such a good person. Like they got it together. They're so
Yeah.
happy, but they don't.
Well, and it's hard. Like we say these things to try and convince ourselves, right? Like I was talking to a guy recently I was studying with, and he knows that he's not living the life. I mean, he freely confessed to me that he was not living how he should, that he was living against the will of God. And yet, when you ask him, "Are you going to go to heaven?" "Oh yeah, absolutely."
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, there's a disconnect here, right? You know that you're living against God, and yet you have convinced yourself that you're okay. Even though you know that you're not okay.
That's
Self delusion is different. Self deception, and there's a reason why James and all the New Testament writers are constantly warning against self deception. It's
right.
so easy to do, so easy.
Well, it's like the destination, aren't they? They think about the destination. So when I get there, I'll be saved. But I
Hmm.
always say, yeah, but are you walking with Jesus now?
Hmm.
Clearly, they're going to say no.
Yeah,
But when you say, are you going to go to heaven? They'll say yes, because that's like in the future, and that's
yeah,
judging some way. But when Jesus said, follow me, he said, follow me now.
yeah. Good
Not,
point.
hey, when you get to heaven, hey, there's my man, high five Jesus. No,
Yeah,
it's not like that. It's like you've been walking with him your whole life, and he's like, here we are.
yeah.
You made it.
Good
You
point.
made it. So, yeah, that's good stuff, man. So tell us what happened to the story. I want to hear about that.
Yeah. So we invited her to come to worship, and she came on. I can't remember if she had come on a Sunday morning or Sunday, but I remember she was there on a Sunday night. And I preached on salvation. I preached on the importance of, knowing our salvation, and the confidence that we can have that if we follow Christ, we can know that we're saved, and this is what you need to do to receive His grace. And she asked me afterwards, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And she was like, I need to know. I did this to be saved. I need to know if this is right. And and of course, me at that point in time, I was trying to get her to understand it herself, right? That's just kind of how I'm trained to do. Is like I tell you from the pulpit, but when it comes to one-on-one, I try and kind of lead you to your own self-awareness of these things. It kind of is against my nature to just tell you this is what you need to do, like, um, because anyway. So that was my thinking at the time, and so I was trying to lead her to that point. She goes, "I just listen. I just need you to tell me, am I lost or am I saved?" You know. And I said, "Well, from what you've told me, it seems according to the scriptures you're lost and you need to obey the gospel." And she's like, "All right, let's do it." And so she was baptized that night. I think maybe a couple of days later, her um, son and daughter were baptized, and
Wow.
then maybe a week or so later, her other son was baptized, and still very faithful Christians. Her daughter's the wife of a preacher, and and that was all the church just taking the opportunity to help someone, and finding them in their need. And I really, that story means a lot to me because it just seems like, it just reminds me that we're sitting back here thinking, oh, nobody wants to be saved, nobody wants to know God, and Jesus is like, you have no idea. The harvest is waiting, right? Like the fields are prepared. You've just got to go out there and find people that are looking. That's the difficult part because we're not used to seeking and finding anymore. We're used to sitting back and expecting people to come to us. And Jesus says, go. He doesn't say, simply tell them to come. And so, yeah, it was a really, really impactful moment for me, and it's always really stood out in my mind.
Well, and when I think about it, because that was with the holiday lights thing, right? That you were
Yeah.
working on.
Yeah.
You were a quote light to the
Yeah. Yeah.
world,
Yeah.
and if you look at what you did, your we might call it strategy was Jesus' strategy. He went to those who are what sick, hungry, naked.
Hmm.
They were diseased. They were truly lost. Even in this world, they felt lost.
Yeah.
And so you did that, and then you were able to approach them with spiritual matters and feed them with the bread of life, which is awesome. I love that. So get out there, everybody. Do that. So you got another story for us? Another one, possibly?
Um, yeah, there was one that I was thinking about earlier where, and this just goes back to how our perception about culture, about people, does not always correspond to reality. We had a young couple visiting with us a few years back, and I was getting to know the young man, and I could tell pretty quickly he was a pretty straight shooter. You know, he didn't like to beat around the bush when it came to talking about things, and so we got to talking, and he had been worshiping in a community church for many years, and he just was honest with me. He's like, I've really grown tired of how everything seems to be a gray area. He's like, there's nothing really difficult that's taught, nothing challenging. There's at no point where they come down hard on things or come down hard on sin. It's just kind of just very ambiguous, you know. And so he liked that we were willing to speak truth and to, you know, call things as they were. And I said, well, hey, let's get together and let's have a frank conversation about the gospel, you know. And we studied for a while, and he was baptized. His girlfriend was baptized a couple of months later, and you know, had been very faithful. And you know, that it was an important moment to me, because I don't, going back, kind of almost going back on what I was saying earlier, I don't want to reject the idea that people don't come to church, you know, and aren't, and that can't be a tool in evangelism. I do think our buildings and having a central location where you can say, hey, here's a safe place to learn about Jesus, I think that's important. I don't want to discount that. In fact, in our more privatized culture, sometimes that is more preferential, right? They can go somewhere if they so choose. But at the same time, you know, we have to go. It's got a give and take, right? And that was one of those instances where it was like he had been invited by someone, and he just happened to be there, found what he was looking for. And, you know, you got to strike while it's hot, though. You can't pass by those opportunities. It's like I've told people before, if someone's at your church building, they're there for a reason. So build off of that. You know, they're expecting you to talk to them about spiritual things. Otherwise, they wouldn't be here. So, you know, it's like, don't assume that you're imposing upon them. Them walking through the doors of that building is essentially saying, I want to know God. I want to follow his word. I want to live, or at least want to know something more than I did know the day before. So that was a really, again, impactful moment for me, and a teaching moment for my own self, because this was a young guy.
Yeah.
And
so if you saw him, you would have been like, nah, probably not interested. Just making that initial.
Well, I just think that there's this perception of, like, the millennial generations, Gen Z, that they don't care about truth, right?
Right.
That they're too relativistic, that they're just there for the experience. And I think there can be some truth to some of those generational studies, but I also think they can be dangerous, because they can categorize a certain. It's funny, because I'm a millennial, technically, and so what's funny about millennials is, like, they like to go against trends. Is one of the things about that. They don't like being advertised to, and so they tend to go against whatever is popular just for the sake of going against it. So I find that funny, because it's like, well, the popular ideal of millennials is that they don't care about truth. So actually millennials would go against that, right? Because that's the popular, like, concept, is that it's experiential. But a funny thing about millennials, I'll just say this, is we're the one, I read the generation where it said we're the generation that has the lowest view of their.
You've been listening to Be Brave. The world right now is a crazy place, and sharing the love of God is the most important thing we can do right now. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit up gobebrave.org. Remember, the love of God is the most powerful force in the universe. Learn how to love like Jesus. See you next time.